can't even remember who I was going to have for 49.
Welcome in to Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. That is Joel C. Cortez. Joel, I think people may have gotten a little extra taste of audio on the front end of that. Hello.
They did. You, with your itchy trigger finger there, just jumping the gun. But we're gonna call this a very special episode. You could call this the asterisk episode. You could call this the Joel Cortez is bad at basic math skills episode. Whatever you want to call it, because last week in my enthusiasm or brain fog or whatever it was, I jumped the gun. I had the itchy trigger finger, and I called it episode 50, which it was most certainly not episode 50, except in name. Perhaps I was just excited by the thought of David Robinson or Bryant Reeves' Big Country Where We Went. No, nay, episode 49 was supposed to be last week, and I done screwed it up. But we're going to call this the 49 with an asterisk episode, and it's fun because there are only two players in NBA history who have ever worn the number 49. And one of them played in 1990, one season with the Los Angeles Lakers. So sorry, Mel McCants, we're not going with you. There is a player who has worn 49 for 5, actually 6 different seasons. That would be Shandon Anderson, formerly of the Utah Jazz, most famously with them. But Arky Shea, he did play for the Knicks during some of the dark days of 2002 through 2005. Shandon Anderson, and then with the Miami Heat after that.
Yeah, the name's on my list, just due to the Knicks went through a really dark period of giving really terrible contracts to people, and it took them a long time to get out from under most of them, and they're just now in the last couple of seasons opening up some flexibility to be able to be smart with their finances. And I'm not saying Shannon's contract was terrible. I'm saying he may have been one of the dudes that was on the roster because the other contracts were so terrible.
He was there during some of the darkest days, and the Knicks did during the aughts especially. They had the uncanny ability to hand out big deals to guys who may have been worth it 3-4 years prior to that, but certainly were not once they got it. They had the uncanny ability to make trades for guys in similar situations who were just leaving their prime. Or you think back to, a case like Jerome James, guys who looked for a split second like they might be worth that big contract, up and coming players. And then for whatever reason, maybe it was just bad luck. Maybe it was the fact that, the Knicks were dysfunctional all over the organization, but those young guys never came close to sniffing those deals that they got. So yeah, it happened. It was a time.
You could say that the Knicks went a long time with a very keen eye for talent. Like they knew
in a bizarro world, like
they knew
man bat sort of way. Yes.
Yeah, good times. But it's better now. I think we mentioned last week that Julius Randle made the All-Star team. We talked about the snubs and all.
He did, and I'm happy to say, I'm going to cut you off. I'm happy to say that Domantas Sabonis, who I was very upset didn't make it.
That's where I was going. I was going to do a quick shout out at the beginning because since we've spoken, that Domantas Sabonis is now filling in for Kevin Durant on Team Kevin Durant.
Yeah, that one hurts a little bit, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Kyrie Irving's shoulder maintenance issue, which kept him out last night in their huge loss to Dallas, I have a sneaking suspicion that Kyrie Irving, also nominated a starter for the All-Stars, is somehow not going to make that game. You can quote me on that one, but all is right with the world. I was saying that I wasn't against Julius Randle getting in. It just kind of stunk because Sabonis was in the same ballpark as him, and all is righter in the world that they're both Eastern Conference All-Stars.
Two deserving guys in Randle and Sabonis, and also two guys, as you sort of mentioned, like one and the same as far as the mold that they're in and the deservingness of their season this year, what they should be in. And luckily, Kevin Durant will not be on Team Kevin Durant, and instead it'll be Team Domantas Sabonis, which will be nice.
And you called it as well. Devin Booker gets in on the Western side. Anthony Davis, who is hurt legitimately and has been hurt for a while. It's not just I hurt and don't want to go to the All-Star game. Devin Booker was the injury replacement, and that was the logical step. DeMar DeRozan was going to be in that conversation too. He may be the next man up if there is that sort of a situation. But
we talked about, like, is the NBA going to try to go like 1-for-1 with the front court? Like, it didn't seem like there was the next available really good all-star.
Not in the West. Not in the West. Yeah, there weren't any other front court guys in the West. It was all guards, whereas in the East you had a little more of a balanced pickings.
Yeah, so that's why glad to see that Devin Booker will fill in, and I wonder what kind of defense they'll play. Right, and that you have another guard on the court, at least available.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out.
Do you wonder?
I'll hold my breath.
Do you wonder if this All-Star game will be different? Like, if it's going to be the normal, like, 160 to 175 type game? And listen, the Kobe rules back in, so like we'll see similar to what last year's game. Actually, basically the exact same format as what we saw for last year's game. But I'm curious if, like, you think that this game itself will be, I don't know, a little less frenetic pace, like just a little different, a little safer, if that makes some sense.
No, it does make sense. And I just wonder how much, if any, joy there will be in this game, because that is one of the defining characteristics of the All-Star game, besides the lack of defense. It's just that everybody knows they're out there, they're having fun. There's a lot of smiles, other than Kawhi Leonard, who's a robot bent on destroying all humanity when he's out there.
But they're hooping and hollering for the fans, like they're doing fun stuff. They're getting the reactions, they're getting the oohs and the ahs, and there's no oohs and ahs to be had as far as
it's a little bit like going to a Harlem Globetrotters game, which if you've never been, go at least once in your life. It is so much fun. It still holds up. But the All-Star game kind of brings that really fun vibe to it. And I just don't know if that joy is going to be there this year with so many guys. And we've talked about this before, calling out the slight but business-oriented double standard of even having the All-Star game. And the fact that they really could have used a break under these circumstances where they're not getting to see family and especially friends very often, to be able to decompress here for a little bit and get away and theoretically be able to see people and break outside the bubble. And for those that are going to the game now, that's not happening. So that, I think, is my bigger concern rather than like the scoring pace. Nobody's going to start playing defense. That's not happening. But is it just going to be kind of a ho-hum routine affair, or will there be guys that kind of rise to the occasion? And it might be some of the younger guys. It might be somebody like a Devin Booker who, I'm here, I deserve this, it's my turn to light it up. I really don't care if LeBron James is playing at 25%. I'm just going to go and I'm going to make a deal of it. I think those are the guys to watch, maybe are the ones coming off the bench, and this is their first go-round, and they're going to live in this moment.
So we have the NBA first half of the season wrap it up this week, and I wanted to get to some discussions on that. But I really, there's a couple of big topics that I think are important to discuss, because I think you start to get issues like this around the All-Star break. And one of those is the logo change possible itself of changing it from what it is now to Kobe Bryant. But the first thing I want to start off is just more recently is, as you mentioned already in this podcast, that the Nets finally lose, and they lose to Luka Doncic, huh? Right? How about that? Luka has a good game. James Harden himself praises Luka and says the Mavs got a good one. There's one other quote I think is interesting out of this game, but how about Team Luka pulling down the Nets and their high-flying, one guy Nets team?
Yeah, I mean, you can't blame Brooklyn for losing. They've been without Durant and Kyrie off and on throughout this entire season. Harden's been the only guy who's shown up consistently, and he just got there, right? I mean, he just arrived from Houston. So it's been a revolving door. But kudos to the Dallas Mavericks, and don't look now, but those slow starting Dallas Mavericks, who I've talked about, need a trade and need to shuffle things up, are suddenly sitting at 500. They're 16-16. They're in 9th place. And I want to give a bigger shout out, not to get away from Luka, but another Texas team that we felt was maybe not dead in the water, but was definitely treading water with zero identity. And it's been just kind of the story of the season. The San Antonio Spurs, all of a sudden, they beat the Pelicans last night. They're 17-12 and in 5th place. And I think you called it early on too, where you said, yeah, they might be down right now, but that might be one of those teams that hangs around and all of a sudden you wake up and they're there because they just didn't go away. San Antonio's doing that, and Dallas, I think a lot of what's happening for them is guys are finally healthy. Kristaps Porzingis played last night against Brooklyn, but they had so many different players out with COVID protocol.
Yeah.
And it's not just that you miss 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games with health and safety protocols. You know, Josh Richardson was up near almost 10 by the time he got back. You can't practice. So you might be able to do some conditioning at home if you're asymptomatic. But if you have symptoms, obviously you might be bedridden. Your breath isn't going to be there. You're doing hardly any conditioning. So to get back, even after you're healthy enough theoretically to come back, you're not going to get your rhythm. And then teams are without chemistry. And we're seeing Dallas take advantage of some teams that are, you know, in the situation they used to be in where they're not at full strength, but they're 7-3 in their last 10. Luka's still doing Luka things, but I think there's more bodies around him. And defensively, they've looked a little bit tighter now. So Dallas is right back into the hunt, and you know, they're 10 games out of first place. They're not catching that, but they're only a game and a half out of the 8th seed. So it's going to be a tight race all the way through. And now, you know, it was Dallas's turn early. They were one of the teams that really got hit hard. Boston has had their issues. And right now it's a Toronto Raptors issue. Kudos to them. The other night they win, and they didn't have their coaching staff or Pascal Siakam, but now it's bad enough they can't even play today.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that their game against the Bulls, it's just not happening because of COVID. They don't even have the 8 players that you need to play, and that's what's so wild about trying to watch this season is that, especially if you're trying to bet on it with DraftKings or something, you've got to be careful because it is hard to sort of figure out night to night what these teams are going to be able to do. I mean, the Wizards get hot all of a sudden because they get to beat up on good teams actually out west, and you're like, whoa, it doesn't make sense. Then Brooklyn goes out west and beats a bunch of teams with like half their like starting big 5 out there that they put out there. Either there's no Durant or there's no Kyrie or there's no both of those guys, and James Harden's just pulling one out against Phoenix or something like that. It's just COVID has made things so difficult for this season to sort of figure out, and I think more importantly for teams to sort of separate themselves, like because sometimes it literally is just contact tracing, and you can't practice, you can't play, and you lose 2 or 3 games in a row because you don't have your main roster together because, you know, contract tracing or something. You can't pull away. You can't just be number 1 by 5 or 6 games in the East or anything.
Yeah, and remember, I just said moments ago how Dallas climbs back to 500. They're 9th in the West. Toronto, with all their issues, is 500 right now. They're 4th place in the East with a 500 record. So, yeah, you talk about topsy-turvy, and that is an opportunity for a lot of teams, you know, you catch somebody on the schedule at the right moment. And like you talked about, Washington suddenly gets themselves back on track. And it's not coincidental that it's because Russell Westbrook is able to suit up consistently now all of a sudden. But it could also be an opportunity if you are betting those games, of course, because that unpredictability, that could be a trap. You could get stuck on that, but you might also win some money when you see something that somebody else doesn't. And over at DraftKings right now, you can get a deposit bonus of up to $1,000 with your first deposit. All you got to do, create a new DraftKings Sportsbook account and make your first deposit, minimum $5 for new customers only. DraftKings will match 20% of your deposit amount up to $1,000 total. So you pick your favorite games and markets to bet on, and you follow the action. All you got to do is use this here link, courtesy of DraftKings and the Brawl Network and us here at BbA. Go to dkng.co/brawl1k. That's dkng.co/brawl1k. And you're right, Arky. It's going to be an up and down season. It feels like musical chairs in a way. And we call that almost every year with the bottom of the Western Conference or the bottom of the playoff spot. There's always like 5 teams and 2 seeds left. And the Eastern Conference, it's more musical chairs typically in the middle seeds. But I think it's going to be that way across the board in both conferences this year. And some deserving team is going to be left without a seat at the end. Maybe a few of them where they were good most of the year, but they got hit by these absences and then hit a down patch where maybe everybody was back, but you just couldn't get your chemistry back. And that's the way it is. There even is talk I was reading today with this Toronto thing. Now that the second half of the season is out, we have a hard deadline for when the NBA season is supposed to end, when the playoffs are supposed to begin, that sort of thing. The NBA does not want to play its season into when the Olympics are starting. And whereas in the first half of the season, when you had absences, you could, of course, just throw it into the second half. But like the Spurs are going to play 40 games in 68 days.
Yeah.
And you're running out of time now when you have these outbreaks late in the season, and it is still going to happen. The NBA is talking about the fact that you may wind a season down without having teams finishing with identical records and games played, which you ran into last year too. But just it's wild times and really unprecedented to finish a major American sports season, and you're not going to have that nice, clean, even finish that we're all used to.
I think we're kind of like there's a danger of pushing up the start of because these games are going through middle of May. This is regular season games, and the game 7 of the NBA Finals, I think, is tentatively scheduled for the day before the opening of the Olympics in was in Tokyo, right? So it's I mean they're pushing it. That could be one very long flight for one or two players if they decide to try to be a part of that team. And I would
have to imagine they won't.
Yeah, I would imagine like we're champions. All right, to the plane. We have got to go. We're going 25
You don't even
hours.
have time to drink your champagne in that case. That would be no fun.
That's true. But I hope it's a West Coast team, right? The other thing I wanted to mention about that praise of Luka against the Nets is that Steve Nash says, quote, he poses every challenge in the book regarding Luka Doncic. He scores, he draws fouls, he makes plays for teammates at an incredibly elite level. Joel, this is the second time he's called out a player for their, quote, ability to draw fouls. And the last time we saw that was with Trae Young, and Trae Young didn't get fouls for like 2 weeks called for him. So what's with Steve Nash's beef with calling these guards for getting their fouls, man?
Well, and pot, you can't call the kettle black now when you have James Harden on your team, who is the ultimate foul, no foul getter, depending on what he needs in that moment. So, and Luka's 22 years old. Trae is about that age as well, and it's crazy the amount of poise that they play with. That's what Harden was pointing out too. That it's the ability to play with different speeds, and most of the time, it's not even fast. It's not a fifth gear type of player. It's just being able to change directions, anticipate. He's big and strong like James Harden is. He's got a lot of lateral jumping ability, the ability to kind of hang in the air, even if he's not going that high. James Harden rarely gets up that high, but his ability to jump in a 360, orbit really to whatever he needs, especially out of that Euro step or the jump stop, for the pullback, step back 3-pointer. It's that ability to create space. And I think that's where Luka's really good. We've talked about too, Harden's a very good passer. Luka is an elite passer. I think Harden is the better scorer than Luka and the better shooter at this point, bar none. And on the defensive end is where you got to make them work. You know that they're going to hurt you offensively, so you got to go after both of them. There are certain types of players that both Harden and Luka can guard. Typically somebody that's bigger and slower than them, they're going to hold their own because they're big, strong guys themselves with quick hands. But when they're chasing around smaller guards or you get them into pick and roll, you really go at them. You're going to try to get them just a little bit out of breath, a little bit out of sync. That's the only way you're going to slow them down offensively is by pushing them defensively.
No, boy, I tell you what, like this second half of the season, I'm not one like Charles Barkley says who everyone needs to go ahead needs to give the NBA players these COVID shots, right? Because they contribute so much tax wise. But it's going to get a little closer by the time we get to May. That's going to be acceptable for them to get some of these shots, and there hopefully will be fewer and fewer of these contract tracing opportunities to where we'll lose teams for weeks at a time. It feels like. I remember a game. Was it last week, maybe the week before, Louisville took on North Carolina, and they lost by 50 because they hadn't played or practiced together for a month because of contract tracing. So, like, it's difficult that now if you start getting these teams back in full force with some of these players, Luka, Harden, Brooklyn, we're going to have a really, really good second half of the season. The first half may have been sort of ho-hum, some teams doing well, some teams falling back of the pack. San Antonio does this and Toronto does that, and there may not have been a lot of fanfare for that's concerned. But I think the second half could end up being a dead sprint, and it's going to be a lot more interesting than the first half was, and I'm excited for it.
I will say this: I appreciate and I highly respect that no coaches or NBA players have come out really. I mean, they've complained a little bit about, I guess, the severity of the distancing, the social distancing, and that's such an inconvenience for everybody, but it's the reality of it. But I do appreciate nobody has come out and been like, well, we've dropped all these games because we haven't had players, and that's such a raw deal, and this contact tracing is to blame. Because the alternative, even in that case of like Louisville losing by 50, what's the alternative? The alternative is not having a season, right? Not getting to play. And so I think there is and has been a good balance of understanding that this might be inconvenient, but it's better than the alternative. We're still getting to play, enjoy basketball, and those sorts of inconveniences and the grand real world scheme of things are minimal to none.
Sure.
When you talk about the major inconveniences or the tragedies that so many people in real life have had to deal with, and NBA players have had tragedy knock at their front door as well. You think about Karl Anthony Towns especially, but DeMar DeRozan just lost his father this past week. I don't know that it was to COVID, but it was a long illness that he was dealing with. So I mean, these are human beings too, and they see what's happening out in the real world. And I appreciate that balance, and just wanted to give kind of a shout out to that people have kept it in perspective, even as it's a tough time for the league and for everybody.
I think that's also part of a damper on the beginning of the season, the first half of the season. It's just that it's not just that there not been fans allowed at the games. That we've seen some of our favorite players taken out of games several weeks at a time, totality wise, or guys sort of opt out for a little bit, Kyrie, or or like our favorite teams just can't play for 2 weeks or something, and it's just sort of been so herky jerky stop and start. It's been kind of a damper. I mean, it's allowed my to go up and play some games, but
it's felt like the G League, hasn't it? It's felt like the G League, hasn't it? Where the roster's changing, like the roster's changing on an almost nightly basis. And again, you can always find silver linings in these things. Yeah, there's been a lot of games lost by top players, but we've also gotten to see some of the younger guys maybe a little bit earlier, or guys that seize upon an opportunity. You're like, oh, he's pretty good. I like that guy. I mean, you think about like Emmanuel Quickly,
yes.
And guys like that who have risen to the occasion for that, and their career arc might be forever different simply because they got onto the floor and did something with it in a moment where their team needed them.
Sure, absolutely. And I think all of that bottled up hopefully will give us a nice explosion of joy and excitement for the second half of the season once we get past this All-Star Day at the YMCA, which will be fun. Joel, the discussion has revamped for the possibility of changing the NBA logo from the Jerry West logo we all know now to a silhouette of one Kobe being Bryant. And I'm curious from your standpoint, not just whether or not it should be done, but do you think something like this, and necessary isn't the right word, but is it prudent? Sure, Jerry West wasn't the greatest player in the NBA, so that's not why we have sort of him as a logo. And Kobe Bryant may not go down for a lot of people as the greatest player in the NBA, but certainly in the very thin air of the conversation. But do you think a change is something that is fair, warranted, and/or positively needed for the NBA in the logo, no matter who it's to, by the way?
It really depends to me on, I guess, where the push is coming from. But even that I can see both ways. So there's some conversation out there that why do we have a predominantly black league with a white guy as the logo? If that's truly like the only reason somebody's pushing for it, and again, it's hard for me to sit here as a white guy and really like get up in arms about that, because well, do we just have to change the logo because of somebody's skin color? That doesn't seem cool. But at the same time, the era has passed. We're way past where Jerry West was relevant, for the NBA. You're right that he was not the greatest player in the league, even in his own time. And there have been, I think, very valid criticisms that he was kind of given the logo as the epitome of this. But why not Bill Russell? Why not Wilt Chamberlain? Why not some of the black players who truly were the NBA? I mean, and this is not to take any shade away from Jerry West, who is a multi-time All-Star, won a championship, went to the finals over and over and over again. Truly, Mr. Basketball as well. And Jerry West, I will say this, has had such an impact on the league after his career too, that his playing career. That's a big part of this, is Jerry West has been the architect of multiple championship teams too. So there's that. But I guess it is kind of a touchy situation depending on why you're wanting to change it. Is it a racial thing? Is this a social justice statement? Is it simply, hey, this is a guy from an era in the 60s and 70s, and we're like 40 years past that? Can we update it? Can we honor Kobe in this way? Because Kobe wasn't the greatest player in the NBA during his era either. He was up there, but he was there. Part of me goes, why does it have to be a Laker in both cases? Come on, Lakers bias. But
let me tamper that down for a little bit. Maybe this would. So my thought is that I understand wanting to change the logo, and I don't think it's a social justice sort of thing. I think it's a more representative of what the modern basketball could be, right?
Sure. Yep. And so I agree with that.
And I can't understand that listen, it's been the logo for forever, right? Like, it's the only logo I know. So like, it's okay that they want to consider changing the logo. I wonder, if you're going to change the logo, is there a Kobe Bryant silhouette that is iconic enough to where it's Kobe, more so than what Michael's was for that slam dunk? Like, if you're wanting like iconic like silhouettes, and listen, I guess Jerry West wasn't really iconic, like it just turned into iconic, right?
Yeah, it's a guy dribbling a ball, right?
Like he's kind of leaning, right? So, like, it's not, he doesn't have to be doing a step back dunk or something, or a 360 dunk or something. But I wonder if, like, you're going to go through all the effort to change now in 2021. Why not make it more representative of what the NBA actually is now, which is, for me, at the very least, like a shooter's league, right? So why not somebody in the middle of a shot, if you know of a silhouette with Kobe that's kind of iconic for him, and it kind of is, with the Kobe shot, right? The Kobe, right?
Yeah.
Like the fadeaway, like Kobe,
which is the Michael Jordan fadeaway, though, right? Kobe was the first to say, "Oh yeah, I totally stole that from MJ."
But Michael does also have sort of like the iconic dunk logo, which is obviously his Jordan brand logo.
Right.
So my curiosity is that, even if you did want to change it, does Kobe have a moment that would be more that you would want to do than, say, like a Michael, who has moments like that?
And it will be brought up, and legitimately so. It will have to be part of the conversation if the Kobe thing gains steam. It was settled out of court, but there were the rape allegations from Denver, right? That was a cloud over Kobe Bryant's career. And whatever happened, we don't know. But that's going to come up, and there's going to be some backlash to say, oh, you want to honor that and put that as your league logo? Like, that's going to be part of the conversation. And where does that stand in the legal process, right? If somebody was never convicted, should that be held against them, right? So that's a difficult one. I guess for me, the only way to do this fairly, if you're the NBA, and to truly make it representative of your league, because that's what this is about. You want a logo that makes it representative of your league itself, is you take a vote among all players, past and present. The Players Association keeps tabs on where everybody has gone to in their retirement. You do a vote, and granted, not everybody's going to participate, but you give the opportunity with a couple of different options, one of them being Kobe, one of them being Jerry West, and maybe somebody else thrown in, like you said, maybe it's Steph Curry, honestly, because that's today's NBA.
Yeah.
Like that's the shooting of today's NBA, and that's more relevant. And thank goodness it's not a Lakers player. So like, just that's how I would do it. You make it democratic and you let the players represent themselves in this case and what their league wants to be, whether it's holding on to the nostalgia and the heritage, which is legit, whether it's honoring Kobe Bryant and kind of the bridge, or whether it's forward looking in some way, or maybe it's not even a particular player. Maybe you go a generic route where it's not modeled after one guy, but it's something that represents, like you said, a shooting motion, whatever it is. Maybe it's something like that, but you let the players vote on it, because that way, those of us who are sitting here, arguing about a logo, a corporate logo, for heaven's sake, when we sit here and get mad and spend airtime on it and fans get mad, truly you can go back and in a positive way hide behind the vote and say, look, the players have spoken. This is what they wanted.
Yeah, and I don't want it to be like a negative connotation. I think, like you were alluding to, of hiding behind the vote. It's just we went about it the democratic way. We didn't just say this dude on the 7th floor drew this up, and this is what we chose.
Exactly.
So you said, hey, listen, we gave like 4 or 5 different either designs or players. Like, even if you don't do the Jumpman logo for Michael, like if you did like the tongue out wagon like dunk from the slam dunk contest, or I'm trying to think of a I don't know how it would look, but I'm just throwing this out there. Like how Steph loves to do, and you brought up Steph, those sort of behind the back step back dribbles where he steps back and puts up the shot. So maybe it's a behind the back dribble. I mean, we already got to do dribbling right now, right? Like it's in front of him. Let's do it behind him now, right? So
if you want perfect shooting form to represent today's NBA, because it's all about shooting, then you would go a little bit against the grain and you would go Klay Thompson, right? Because there's nobody with a better shot form than Klay Thompson.
Sure. I was just trying to think that if you go a route that isn't like an iconic sort of, you can find many photos of this dude doing something like this, or there just isn't a photo that's been circulated a trillion times online, that I think in the age of 2020, and I don't remember what year the Jerry West logo came out, but I think the year 2021 is a good time to sort of pick from a logo that is sort of really, really like what's the Bulls mascot, right? Like how about him, like
Benny the Bull?
Yeah, like Benny the Bull, like on the trampoline, like Duncan went out. That's not a bad one. Or who is the lady that does the plates and flips them over her head? Red Panda, I think it is. Or
oh yeah.
you could do that. That's not the worst thing in the world. Or how about the guy that's on 2K19 every other commercial break, which is in between quarters, which is the dude doing front wheelies on a bicycle, and that's the only celebration I can get for some reason.
For the last 3 or 4 seasons, by the way. Come on, 2K, you're better than that.
Yeah,
like do something.
Yeah, there's other acts out there. Like put in some generic dogs or something running around.
I would love that. It used to be, before it was the guy in wheelies, although some of it's still in there, was just people dunking off trampolines. That was the 2K.
Yes,
that was the bridge screen forever. Yeah,
there's like
not as much.
Screens, right? Yeah. Or just a giant t-shirt cannon, which is it's played out.
Right.
Yeah. Or baby racing.
I love the idea of the dogs. I love the idea of the dogs.
Dogs chasing frisbees and stuff, grabbing them out of thin air. Boom, done. Come on, 2K. We're giving you enough money for this. It's fine. You can pick some generic dogs and every 7th time a different one wins. Who cares?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you and you could monetize that, right? Sit and bet on the hot dog races like you do at Milwaukee Brewers games.
You can. Come on now, bet all your tokens or whatever, right? Come on. Okay.
We are so far off track. We probably should just talk about balls at this point, right, Arky Shea?
My friend, Manscaped.com is the place to talk about them balls, dude. I cannot tell you how much nicer it is to have an undercarriage that is so smooth and clean and smells nice, and it's the way God really intended it to be, right? Like, we didn't have the capability back in like the Stone Age, but we eventually learned, right? And Manscaped has perfected it with the Lawnmower 3.0, the ball toner and deodorant, and now you can be so fresh downstairs and so well maintained. And you can do it right now by getting and get 20% off. I did a little Porky Pig there for you.
You absolutely did.
But Manscaped folks. 20% off we can get you right now by using our promo code and free shipping. If you go to manscaped.com and go to the checkout once you figured out what you want, and then put Brawl, BRAWL, I get you 20% off and free shipping right now. So manscaped.com, promo code Brawl, BRAWL. That's all, folks. So, Joel, I look at one of the many teams that we've discussed being good and or bad. We've not talked about in a couple of weeks, but they've been in a bit of a free fall, Joel, and that's the Boston Celtics. The Celtics are in no rush to play good right now, apparently, and I think they just won. Last night? I think they just won, and so it's nice for them. But they have been struggling, and not only struggling, Joel, but like getting killed in the second half of games, and that's been all season that they've been get killed in the second half. But they are legitimately, I think, the worst or second worst defensive rated team in the second half and fourth quarter, especially of games. And this blows my mind with such a strategician, someone who does strategery with the hoops like Brad Stevens does.
Strategist.
I guess that's with a strategist like I don't know, I like strategian better. With the strategic Brad Stevens calling the plays, it feels like I don't even know, Joel. Like you sort of watched this team do this year. I don't know what to do when like this team like literally is getting blown out by like Atlanta, like it's not even close. Like there are games where it looks like that they're no longer even in contention for the playoffs, even though that they still are. They look like a bottom dweller team a bunch, and I can't figure it out because it's more than just not having a healthy Kemba.
Yeah, and you've got two all-stars who are both averaging 25 points a game,
young,
right?
Very, very good young all-stars.
Yeah. And we've talked about them as needing to shake things up, and I think that still stands, even though they got a very nice quality win over the Indiana Pacers the other night, as you mentioned, although Indiana's in a bit of a free fall right now as well. But I look at
Domantas Sabonis hangover after
right,
faithful to the reserves. They got too excited, went out one night. I know what happened.
In the case of Boston, part of this goes back to on the offensive end, they are a bottom half team scoring wise, despite having two guys scoring 25 points a game. Think about that for a minute. Bottom like 12 offense, two guys scoring 50 points between them. Some of that is because Kemba's only played 17 games, and he had a lot of rust, as you and I have talked about. Although I am happy to report that over the last handful of games, Kemba looks a lot more like himself. The numbers are not only coming back, but he's playing with bounce, whereas early on, he just didn't seem like he could change directions very well. He was slow.
He does this. Like, he's had like 4, 5, 6 game stretches, and then it's like that's all his knee can give us.
Right, and that's the concern. Is this sustainable or not? And from what he's saying, it's confidence at this point. It's not necessarily, structural in knee, and I guess we'll believe it when we see it. But he has to be able to be there as that tertiary scorer. And here's why. Because Marcus Smart has only played 17 games as well. And Marcus Smart is as important to the Boston Celtics as Draymond Green is to the Golden State Warriors. Because that is your glue guy who fills every gap defensively and makes all those little plays and then doesn't hurt you on the offensive end either. He's a very smart offensive player, even though he only chips in 13 points a game. But on this Boston Celtics team, he's your fourth leading scorer doing that, and is just a heady player.
And he's like the ultimate, like, not all of this shows up in the stat sheet guy.
Correct.
Yeah.
His impact is all over the place. But I think what has happened is it's not a bench that scores a lot of points. We've talked about that before. They can do some things, and I really like the chemistry that's developing as I've watched their games now between Peyton Pritchard and Robert Williams III. You've got a rookie and a third-year player, respectively. There's a really nice chemistry developing between that point guard and their center, and Robert Williams is their center of the future, even as Daniel Tice is a nice kind of yeoman role player who can hit some threes and will play good defense and rebound. But What happens without Kemba Walker is Jaylen Brown has to step up and be your second leading scorer. And when he is having to play a lot of ISO ball, because this team is bottom 10, or like I said, bottom 12 offensively, and they're like third worst in assists. So it's a ton of Jason Tatum ISOs, which you want because that's what he's good at. But you don't want Jaylen Brown having to ISO so much. And then you're asking Jaylen Brown on the other end to be your lead defender. Remember, Jaylen Brown came into the league as a guy who was a defensive disruptor. I think that's his role. But when he's got Marcus Smart out there, it means he can go guard the other team's second best player, and then his scoring goes up. Right now, you're asking him to be number one defensively and number two on offense. And I think it's just a lot to ask. And granted, he has risen to the occasion. He is an all-star. But the guys behind him then are also having to step up. And my major beef right now with this Celtics roster, we know Smart may come back after the All-Star break. They're just too small in the backcourt. Like, Kemba's barely 6 feet. Jeff Teague is 6'3", but Peyton Pritchard, Tremont Waters, and I think Carson Edwards are all under 6 feet or right at 6 feet. You've got like 6 different point guards in that rotation. You don't have Marcus Smart, who's an undersized shooting guard. Remember, he originally came into the league as a point guard. Romeo Langford, who's 6'4", hasn't played all year, might be back after the All-Star break. And Aaron Nesmith, the rookie, is 6'5", and doesn't look like he's quite NBA ready yet. So when Boston runs up against teams like Atlanta that's got really big wings, you can only and lots of them, you can only deploy Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in so many different ways. They can't cover the whole floor. And as I watched that Celtics-Hawks game, the Hawks didn't have Bogdanovich, they didn't have Cam Reddish, and they didn't have DeAndre Hunter either. So 3 of their top 4 wings are gone. But who kills Boston? Danilo Gallinari with 10 threes. Dude's 6'10".
Dude, it's like they literally said, hey, we don't like your specialty is shooting threes. Let's give you the first few open. Yeah. And then he starts hitting them, and it's like it's over. Like, he's just in a rhythm. He's a streaky shooter, and he got on the good streak.
But part of what happened too is, like, Trae Young didn't start off very hot, but you have to send 1, even 2 defenders at Trae Young. And Tony Snell came off the scrap heap, hit some early threes, and people were like, oh crap, we got to guard Tony Snell. So now you're starting to run out on him, and Gallo was just so wide open, and Kevin Huerter hit him with some threes as well. So Atlanta's the perfect example of a team that I think Boston has really struggled with. Lots of bigger wings that can shoot, and this is where you look up and down this roster and go, okay, if Semi Ojeleye is not the answer defensively for that type of team, why is he still on this Celtics roster? Tristan Thompson probably doesn't have to be there if Robert Williams is your future and Daniel Tice can hold it down. If you want to keep Tristan Thompson, then maybe you don't need Grant Williams as another tweener forward, and you certainly don't need Jeff Teague when Peyton Pritchard has shown that he can be the backup point guard even as a rookie. Like, he's got that locked down, and you've got some other prospects in Waters, Green, and Edwards that may find a different home, and you've got a bazillion draft picks. Like, Boston simply needs some more length, I think, is what this comes down to.
Yeah, by the way, Atlanta hit the most threes ever hit against Boston Celtics ever of all time in history of all time ever. Granted, they probably weren't hitting a lot back in the Auerbach days, but still.
Right. And it's an outlier and maybe unfair for me to pick their worst game in a while, but it is, I think, it's a perfect example. Yeah, it's a perfect example, though, too, of when Kemba doesn't play, they're overmatched offensively. When he does play, they can hang a little bit better if he's looking good. But defensively, they just miss Marcus Smart so much. And normally your bench guys are supposed to be able to step up and fill some of those gaps, and they just don't have the right mix. They have to play Pritchard and Teague together in that backcourt so often, and even though those guys compete, like, they're just too small. And it puts Tatum and Jaylen Brown, as we've said over and over, and a lot of other people have said this too, it's just asking too much of those two guys.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I don't think Tristan Thompson's long for this team. I think Danny Ainge is going to move him. And I think rightfully so, by the way. Just personal opinion there. I had someone who's a big Boston fan text me and said, I think like he just watches it. He finds their games, watches them, and then texts me even when I'm not watching them, which is most of the time because I hate the Boston Celtics.
Hey, you're a Knicks fan. Let me tell you about the Celtics, right?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, cry me a river with all your championships, right? So you're having one bad stretch of games, but he was texting me and he said that this team is so just soft. And I've watched some of their games, and I can see that a little bit once you lose a bunch of games in a row. But I feel like I'm with you, Joel. I just don't think they're matched up to have a lot of success. Their roster is just not good enough to be elite right now. And I think it's not the top two guys, obviously. And I don't know how many times we have to say it, but we've been on the something's more wrong with Kimba than they're telling us train for 2 years now. But I just think that roster isn't set up to win the East or to win a championship right now, even though, they kind of almost did win the East last year. But I think this roster right now, I just think they're outmatched in like most of their games against good teams or against decent teams. Like, I just think they're overwhelmed.
You have to make a decision, and some of this is based on the intel, internally that they have. If Marcus Smart is still a long ways off and may not be a meaningful contributor yet this season, you have to get Jaylen Brown some more defensive help because you're asking him to be, like I said, your number 2 scorer. If you want Jaylen Brown to be your lead defender, which he can do, and if you want him to slide a little bit back, fewer shots, less of an offensive focal point, then your intel better be honest whether Kemba Walker is healthy or not, whether he can help with that, and you still are going to have to go out and get some more offensive help somewhere. You're going to have to put those draft picks to use, and you are so overstocked with
Right.
undersized guards. And even at the center position, they're overstocked there too, where like, okay, you have Tristan Thompson, but you got Taco Fall back there as well. Like, if you're not going to, you got to get rid of one of those guys. You can't have 4 centers on your roster in the modern NBA, even if Tice and Thompson can both play a little bit of power forward too. So, like, this is a Danny Ainge problem. And if he does nothing at the trade deadline, and we once again get more news stories, which Danny Ainge loves to plant as soon as the deadline is done, it's like clockwork. There's always stories of, well, we were talking to this person and we got really close, but they were asking too much, or we chose not to. Danny Ainge always comes out and says, we were never shopping our players. People were coming to us, and we just weren't going to get back what we wanted. Like, you can't do that this time, Danny Ainge. It's time to earn that money again and swing some trades and get this roster like back where it needs to be.
Yeah, I was just looking up that the Celtics only have their own first round. Let's see, coming up in this draft, they have their own first round pick plus their own second round pick and the Thunder pick if it's between 56 and 60. Then it's their own first round and own second round plus the Hornets pick. 2023 their own first round, 24 their own first round, 2025 their own first round, but they don't have, I think for the next 7 or 8 drafts after that, like they don't have any more like first round picks. So like, whatever draft picks outside of that you're willing to sort of put up as bait, like it's, I don't know how many people are going to say, hey, give me your, 2029 no, actually 20, would it be 2033 first round pick at this point, So it's going to be interesting to see what Danny Ainge can do. He's got a ton of assets. It's just how desirable are those assets right now, and who are you going to have to move to sort of sweeten that pot to get somebody, some bigger wing, some score, something, because right now it's flat.
Absolutely agreed. Yep. But at the same time, the East is so fluid, like we've said, and a team that falls down in front of you like Toronto, Boston was near the top to start the season. And, Philly's gone through their own COVID issues and they're sitting in first place. Brooklyn's gone with their roster turnover issues and they're sitting in second place. So you really don't have any excuses. Boston has had guys miss some time now with injuries, and everybody around you has had those issues too. Indiana was up, as a middle pack team and has hung around there, but they just got Jeremy Lamb back. They've been without TJ Warren all year. Like, everybody's got their own issues. So it's an opportunity that you might be able to take advantage of that. Just catch a, nice 7-game winning streak and be back in the top 3 in the East. But at the same time, if you don't, like, nobody's going to sit and cry for you, because all of these teams have had their roster issues. Milwaukee's been without Drew Holiday for like 10 games. So it is what it is.
Yeah, to fine tune that point, Boston is 5.5 games out of first, but they're tied for sixth. Well, they have the tiebreaker over Miami right now. They're in sixth in the East right now, but they're half a game out of being hosting in the first round of the playoff team. But they're also 2 games away from being like 12th or 13th in the East. So
there's another, since you mentioned them with Miami, there's another team that started out slow, dead in the water, had a lot of COVID issues as well, and injury issues with Jimmy Butler. And hey, look, guess what? They're 7th place right now. They're back in it after just kind of grinding and sticking with it. And they beat the red hot Utah Jazz the other night, and pretty significantly. And I just want to point out, like, I've been a little bit of a Utah Jazz doubter with this win streak, because I've seen the Utah Jazz Quinn Snyder machine do this over the past couple seasons, where they always rip off this big mid-season win streak, and they just did it. And then I see Utah and Miami, and Utah, their MO has been get up early and just strangle you to death from there. They don't let you back into the game. But Miami kept it close, and when Miami was up in the closing last couple minutes, you saw maybe some of the weaknesses with Utah, where who else is their closer? Like, Donovan Mitchell is that guy, but they were keying off on him so hard, was Miami. And they're such a good defensive team that Mitchell was not getting to his spots or getting really good looks. Mike Conley used to be able to do that and still can in short stretches, but it reminded me a little bit of those Atlanta Hawks teams where it was like Al Horford, Paul Millsap, and Jeff Teague was there, Kyle Korver, where it's like, yeah, it's a bunch of all-stars and they're really, really good. But if you can get them down to crunch time, one team had Jimmy Butler and one team did not have Jimmy Butler. And that was the story of that Heat Jazz game, where sum of all parts is really nice, but you get to a certain level in the NBA, certain games in clutch time. And if you don't have that guy, if Donovan Mitchell isn't that guy, there could be some issues there. So count me still among the Utah Jazz skeptics, where I highly respect what they do. I am not sure that's the number one team in the Western Conference, though.
I will say this. I saw a stat breakdown of that sort of idea, that what their streak was and the run is now versus what it was, like, say, last year. And like their numbers, like, they're much better this year as far as offensive and defensive efficiency and ratings, that they're in the top 3, if not number 1 in a bunch of those categories, which was not the case last year when they went on that run. But this year, they seem to be looking at least a little different. So
yeah, and I'm certainly not saying that they're not a top 4 seed, and I'm not gonna say they're not elite either. I think they are, and they've earned that. I think they're kind of this year's version of the Nuggets in a way. Their starting 5 is pretty bulletproof across the board. And then you can bring Joe Ingles off the bench and Jordan Clarkson and Derek Favors. And Georges Niang has done really nice work for them, kind of unheralded work as a stretch 4 type of guy. So they go 9 deep. They're very well coached. Like I said, that starting 5 is just about what you want in today's NBA. So they are really, really good. But there's room for them to grow before I call them like the championship favorites, just because they happen to be sitting in first place right now mid-season. We see that all the time, and the team that's in first might not actually be the best one.
2 sentences or less, then we'll get out of here. What would you need to see from Utah, let's say right out of the break, to sort of convince you that they have the staying power?
Continue to beat good teams as you have, but beat those good teams in the clutch too.
So not just get up and strangle them, as you talked about, but if it's a close game, be able to pull a couple of those out too.
Yeah, is the hierarchy Donovan Mitchell at the top, which it should be, but let's see him take that next step as the closer, knowing that Bojan Bogdanovic is just lurking out there looking for big shots. But when defenses tee off on those 2 guys, it gets a little bit dicey when you're looking at Conley and Rudy Gobert to bail you out on offense.
No, I think I'm with Shaq. I don't see it with Donovan Mitchell. I don't get it. Trash player as far as I'm concerned. Whatever.
Oh boy,
just gets away with it in Utah, I guess.
All right, you're going to get so many emails from angry Utah Jazz fans who don't understand sarcasm.
Oh, I'm not going to get any emails from any Utah Jazz fans. They're not listening to this show. They're staring at Donovan Mitchell's butt and just hoping he gets another 25, 7, and 9 or something. That's what they're hoping for. Joel, thank you for the time, brother. We will do this again in the middle of the week with our BbA bite, but this was another fun podcast. Thank you, sir.
Episode 49 with the asterisk is in the book. Thank you, Shannon Anderson. And episode 51 is coming up next week.
That's right. We are going to film 2 weeks in the future, but a week in the past coming up this week.
And by the way, you can check us out on YouTube. If you're listening to us on audio, look at BbA on the YouTube or search Basketball by Association. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can hear the audio only version on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast.
That's right. Get it. Thanks, Joel.